The desert awakens with a whisper. Golden light unfurls across the endless dunes, and there, like a mirage made of stone, rise the sharp silhouettes of pyramids. Not one, not 10, but hundreds. Their edges bite into the dawn, their shadows stretch across the sand, and their silence feels almost defiant. This is not Egypt, this is Sudan, and beneath these sands lies a forgotten empire that once ruled the Nile, shaped kings, and changed history. We are in the ancient land of Kush, home to the Nubian pharaohs, the black kings who dared to conquer Egypt itself. Their capital, Meroe, was a city of gold and iron, of scholars and queens. For nearly 1,000 years it flourished as the beating heart of one of Africa's greatest civilizations. Yet today, its name barely echoes beyond the desert winds. How did we forget them? History has a strange way of choosing its heroes. The victors write the stories, and the rest are left to fade beneath the dust. Egypt's pyramids became symbols of civilization. Sudan's were swallowed by silence. When early explorers stumbled upon these monuments in the 19th century, they expected to find echoes of Egypt's glory. Instead, they found something older, something unique, a distinct culture that blended African identity with ancient grandeur. But rather than celebrate it, they dismissed it, labeling it a mere imitation of Egypt's greatness. The arrogance of empire buried the truth of another. But these pyramids tell their own story. Look closely, and you'll see how different they are. Smaller, steeper, sharper in design. Built not as monuments of power, but as vessels for the soul's journey to eternity. Inside lie the remains of kings and warrior queens, of artisans and priests whose hands once shaped bronze, ink, and destiny. Their walls bear inscriptions of gods with Nubian faces, their treasures a testament to wealth and spiritual sophistication. The Empire of Kush was no shadow of Egypt. It was its rival, its mirror, and for a time, its master. In the 8th century BCE, King Paye led his army north and seized the throne of Egypt, founding the 25th dynasty, the Kushite dynasty. For nearly a century, Black Pharaohs ruled the Nile, uniting the two lands under one crown. They restored temples, revived ancient rituals, and brought balance to a kingdom that had lost its soul. And yet, when their reign ended, so too did their story in the world's memory. Western historians turned the page, focusing once again on Egypt's splendor and Rome's might, leaving Africa's deeper legacy untold. But history has a way of resurfacing, like bones rising through the shifting sands. Today, archaeologists in Sudan are unearthing tombs, deciphering texts, and rediscovering a civilization that refuses to be forgotten. The pyramids of Meroe stand as silent witnesses to a past erased and reborn. They are more than ruins. They are proof that Africa's heart once pulsed with empires that shaped the world, proof that greatness is not bound by geography or color, but by the stories we choose to remember. And here, in the stillness of the desert, the forgotten empire of Kush waits, not for discovery, but for recognition. 3,000 years ago, when the sun blazed upon the endless Nile, two civilizations gazed at one another across the waters, each powerful, each proud. In the north, Egypt built its glory in stone and myth. But in the south, in the rich lands of Nubia, another power was stirring. Its people were darker, its culture older than the world gave it credit for, and its destiny far grander than the world would ever admit. This was the Kingdom of Kush, a realm forged by resilience, ambition, and the unrelenting rhythm of the river itself. The Kushites had watched Egypt for centuries. They traded gold, ivory, and iron for papyrus and grain. They learned Egypt's language, absorbed its art, and studied its gods. But they were never imitators. Beneath the surface, Kush was forming its own identity, a culture that merged the wisdom of the Nile with the fierce independence of Africa's heartland. Where Egypt built walls to separate life from death, Kush built bridges between the two. Where Egypt saw conquest, Kush saw continuity. Then came a moment that would upend the balance of the ancient world. Around 750 BCE, a king named Paye, whose name meant the Pious One, marched north with an army and a vision. His inscriptions tell of divine purpose, not greed. He believed he was chosen by the gods to restore the purity of Egyptian rule, which had fallen into chaos. His campaign was not one of destruction, but of restoration. City after city surrendered without resistance. Even Thebes, Egypt's sacred heart, opened its gates. By the time his conquest was complete, the unimaginable had happened. The Black Pharaohs of Kush now ruled the two lands of Egypt, Thom and Nubia, alike. This was the birth of Egypt's 25th dynasty, the era of the Kushite pharaohs. For nearly a century, these kings reigned over one of the greatest empires in the ancient world. They revived temples long abandoned, restored forgotten rituals, and breathed spiritual life into a land weary of division. Statues carved during this era show kings with proud Nubian features, broad noses, strong jaws, unmistakably African visages, adorned with the double crown of unified Egypt. For the first time, the throne of the pharaoh was not just the seat of one nation, but the bridge between two worlds. Under Paye's successors, the empire flourished. Taharqa, perhaps the most celebrated of the Kushite pharaohs, transformed Egypt into a land of renewed prosperity. He built monuments from Thebes to Memphis, irrigated the fields, and restored the temples of Amun. His reign marked the last great age of Egyptian architectural brilliance. But as power grew, so too did envy. From the east came the Assyrians, fierce, relentless conquerors armed with iron and empire. They invaded, burned cities, and drove the Kushites back to their southern homeland. Yet even in retreat, Kush did not crumble. In Nubia, far from the ruins of Egypt, the kingdom reinvented itself. Its capital moved to Napata, and later to Meroe, a thriving metropolis of iron smelters, libraries, and pyramids. While Egypt fell under foreign rule, Persian, Greek, Roman, the Kushite civilization endured for more than 1,000 years. They minted their own coins, wrote in their own script, and honored gods that bore distinctly African faces. They had conquered the conquerors, not merely with armies, but with endurance, creativity, and identity. And yet, when modern textbooks tell the story of civilization, the Kingdom of Kush is little more than a footnote, if mentioned at all. The legacy of Black Pharaohs, men who ruled Egypt's throne and defined its final golden age, was buried beneath centuries of neglect and colonial bias. But their pyramids remain, rising from the Sudanese sands like a quiet rebellion against forgetfulness. They stand as proof that Africa's heart once ruled the ancient world, and that the story of civilization is far bigger and far blacker than history ever dared to admit. Stand before a Kushite pyramid, and the desert seems to hold its breath. The sun glints off steep faces of sandstone, each block carved with care, each angle deliberate. Unlike the monumental perfection of Giza's giants, these pyramids rise sharply, almost defiantly, as if determined to pierce the heavens rather than simply ascend toward them. Their sides tilt at daring angles, over 70 degrees, turning gravity itself into a challenge. They are smaller, yes, but their spirit feels larger, more personal, more human. In their bold geometry, one senses not imitation, but independence. This was no accident of design. The Kushites chose their own architectural voice, a rebellion written in stone. Where Egypt's pyramids spoke of divine distance and eternal order, the pyramids of Kush whispered of closeness, of individuality, of life carried into death with intimacy and pride. They were built not for gods unreachable in the sky, but for ancestors whose spirits still walked the earth. Each structure reflected a choice: to honor tradition, yet redefine it, to look northward toward Egypt's grandeur, and then deliberately turn away. Between 300 BCE and 300 CE, during the Meroitic period, this design philosophy flourished. In the city of Meroe, once a bustling metropolis of artisans, merchants, and royal courts, the desert became a necropolis. Hundreds of pyramids clustered together like a stone constellation, each marking the resting place of a king, a queen, or a noble whose story had shaped the empire. They were built faster than Egypt's colossal tombs, using smaller stones and more efficient methods, but what they lacked in scale, they made up for in number and soul. More than 250 pyramids still stand across the sites of Meroe, Nuri, and El Kuru, a density of royal tombs unmatched anywhere else on Earth. Walk among them, and the air feels charged with something ancient and proud. The doorways are narrow, the chambers intimate. The walls once bore colorful paintings, processions of gods, offerings of incense, the flight of the soul toward eternity. Inscriptions written in the Meroitic script, the oldest known written language south of Egypt, still mark the inner walls, though scholars are only beginning to understand their meanings. Each pyramid was not just a tomb, but a text, a statement of who these people were and how they wished to be remembered. The Kushites were master builders in their own right. Their engineers experimented with steeper inclines and refined mortar techniques that allowed speed without sacrificing stability. Their artisans carved capstones, called pyramidions, engraved with images of the sun god, symbolizing resurrection and eternal life. Their funerary chapels, built adjacent to the pyramids, formed miniature temples where the living communed with the dead. The entire necropolis was both sacred ground and a living archive of belief. And yet, the deeper one studies these structures, the clearer the message becomes. The Kushites were not Egypt's shadow, but its successor. They inherited the legacy of the Nile and transformed it into something entirely their own. Their pyramids do not mimic, they challenge. They rise from the sand like declarations of sovereignty, each one a whisper of cultural defiance against the centuries that tried to erase their name. In their angled silhouettes, we see more than architecture. We see resistance made eternal. For every steep face, every precise joint, every shadow cast upon the golden dunes speaks of a civilization that refused to bow to the narratives of others. Here, in the silence of Meroe, rebellion is not shouted, it is built. History is not only written by the victors, it is silenced by them. The story of Kush did not fade naturally into obscurity. It was buried. When the empire's last kings were gone and the sands reclaimed their cities, silence settled over the Nile's southern reaches. But the deeper silence came centuries later, crafted not by time, but by ideology. In the 19th century, When European explorers and scholars began charting the ancient world, they carried more than notebooks and measuring tools. They carried a world view, a conviction that civilization was born in the north, that greatness was pale and Mediterranean, that Africa existed only as its shadow. When they found the pyramids of Sudan, their eyes could not reconcile what they saw with what they believed. To admit that black Africans had built empires, mastered metallurgy, ruled Egypt itself, and left behind monuments rivaling Giza would unravel the very myth that sustained colonial dominance. So they looked, and they diminished. The Kingdom of Kush was rewritten as a footnote to Egypt's glory, its achievements reduced to imitation. Its kings became Ethiopian usurpers. Its art was dismissed as derivative, its temples described as crude. European museums filled their halls with Egypt's treasures, while Sudan's artifacts gathered dust in storerooms or were left to crumble under desert winds. The silence was not neglect. It was policy. It reinforced the lie that Africa's history began only when Europe arrived. Even archaeology itself, a science devoted to uncovering truth, became an accomplice. Expeditions to Nubia were rare and poorly funded compared to the lavish campaigns in Egypt. Scholars who did study Kush often found their work marginalized or doubted. The narrative had already been written. Egypt was civilization's cradle, Africa its wilderness. To question that hierarchy was to threaten the foundation of empire itself, and the physical damage matched the intellectual one. In 1834, Giuseppe Ferlini, an Italian treasure hunter posing as an explorer, arrived at Meroe. What he did there was an act of vandalism disguised as curiosity. Convinced that gold must lie within the pyramids, he used explosives to blast open their peaks, toppling centuries of craftsmanship in a matter of days. The treasures he found, jewels belonging to queens, were paraded through Europe as curiosities, proof not of African grandeur but of European discovery. Ferlini's destruction robbed us of irreplaceable evidence, desecrating tombs that had survived millennia of wind and sand. For generations afterward, that damage continued, not always by dynamite, but by indifference. While Egypt's monuments were fenced, guarded, and funded, Sudan's remained exposed to erosion and theft. Tourists flooded Giza by the millions. The pyramids of Meroe were left to the silence of the dunes. Even now, history textbooks dedicate chapters to Egypt and mere paragraphs, if anything, to Kush. The imbalance is not innocent. It echoes centuries of intellectual conquest, where even memory became a colonized territory. But silence has its limits. The sands of Sudan still whisper the names of forgotten queens, the clang of iron forges, the hymns of Amun sung in Nubian tongues. The ruins remain, stubborn against the wind, daring the world to look again, for every pyramid still standing, for every artifact unearthed from the earth's embrace. The myth of Africa's emptiness cracks a little more. The empire may have been silenced, but not erased. The stones still speak. And if we listen closely, the voice of Kush is rising once again from the desert's long, deliberate quiet. Walking through the pyramids of Meroe feels like wandering through the afterlife of a civilization. The desert stretches endlessly, its dunes shifting like whispers of time. The silence is almost supernatural, so complete that the wind becomes the only voice, sculpting the sand around the bases of pyramids that have stood for more than 2,000 years. Their edges catch the morning light, sharp as blades, and for a moment, you could believe you've stepped onto another planet. No crowds, no fences, no souvenir stalls, only the hum of history, unfiltered and vast. It is possible to stand here for hours and see no one. Days might pass before another traveler appears on the horizon. In that solitude, the scale of what once was begins to unfold. Each pyramid marks a life once crowned in glory, a name once spoken by priests and builders and soldiers. Now the dunes are their audience, their only witnesses. The stillness that protects these ruins is both a gift and a curse. It shields them from the relentless machinery of tourism, but it also buries them in obscurity. Sudan's modern story has done little to lift that veil. Decades of civil war, political isolation, and economic hardship have made archaeological work perilous and sporadic. Researchers come in waves, brief, hopeful, and often cut short by instability. Many dig sites lie dormant, half-excavated, half-forgotten, waiting for calmer years that never quite arrive. The same geography that once made Kush the crossroads of civilizations, commanding the trade arteries between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean, now sits in a corridor of conflict and neglect. Where caravans once carried gold, ivory, and ideas, today there are checkpoints and empty roads. Yet within that hardship lies a strange kind of preservation. The pyramids of Meroe have escaped the fate of overexposure. They have not been fenced off behind ticket booths or polished for camera lenses. No cranes hover over them in restoration, no glass panels separate them from the wind. They stand raw and unaltered, the way time left them. This is authenticity in its truest form, a landscape that hasn't been repackaged for comfort or spectacle. The visitor who comes here meets the past on its own terms. It's hard not to feel the weight of that encounter. The sand shifts beneath your feet, erasing your footprints almost as soon as you make them, as if the desert itself refuses to be marked again. You touch the stone, warm, coarse, ancient, and realize that you are standing in a place the world has almost forgotten, yet which remembers itself perfectly. There is a haunting purity in that. Meroe's solitude becomes its last defense against erasure. In a world where history is often consumed and repackaged, these ruins remain sovereign, untamed, unsimplified, and unbought. They belong not to empires or museums, but to the silence that has guarded them for millennia. The desert keeps its secrets well, and perhaps that is how Kush endures, not in the noise of recognition, but in the quiet defiance of survival. Here, among the dunes, the forgotten empire still breathes, slowly, steadily, waiting for the world to listen again. Not everyone surrendered to the silence. While the world turned its gaze north toward Giza, a handful of visionaries, archaeologists, historians, and Sudanese scholars refused to let Kush vanish into dust. They believed the desert still had stories to tell, and they dedicated their lives to listening. Their work was not just about discovery, it was about restoration, of truth, of dignity, of memory. Among the first to hear the whispers of this forgotten empire was the Swiss archaeologist Charles Bonnet. In the 1970s, Bonnet arrived at Kerma, a site many had dismissed as peripheral to Egypt's grandeur. What he found shattered those assumptions. Beneath the sand lay the remains of a powerful, urban civilization. Temples, fortresses, workshops, older than many of Egypt's own dynasties. The artistry, the scale, the organization spoke of a people who had built greatness on their own terms. Bonnet's discoveries redefined the timeline of the Nile Valley, proving that the roots of African civilization ran deeper than anyone had dared to admit. His decades-long devotion turned Kerma from a forgotten ruin into a cornerstone of world heritage. Then came the quiet perseverance of Timothy Kendall, an American archaeologist whose career has been a lifelong dialogue with the land of Kush. For over 40 years, Kendall has mapped tombs, recorded inscriptions, and fought to protect endangered sites from looting and erosion. His writings challenge the comfortable myth that Kush was merely a mirror of Egypt. To Kendall, the Kingdom of Kush was a distinct civilization, spiritually vibrant, artistically bold, politically ingenious. His work at Nuri, where the great pharaoh Taharqa was buried, continues to reveal the architectural brilliance and spiritual complexity of these Nubian kings. But perhaps the most powerful voices have come from Sudan itself. Scholars like Dr. Salah Mohammed Ahmed and Dr. Abdel Rahman Ali Mohammed have led the movement to reclaim their nation's past from foreign archives and footnotes. They have trained new generations of Sudanese archaeologists, built museums, and fought for recognition on the global stage. To them, archaeology is not just science. It is sovereignty. Every artifact unearthed, every inscription preserved, is an act of reclamation, a statement that the story of Kush belongs to its own descendants, not to the empires that once wrote it out. Their efforts bore fruit in 2003, when UNESCO designated the sites of Gebel Barkal and the pyramids of Napata and Meroe as World Heritage Sites. It was a quiet but monumental victory, an acknowledgement that these monuments deserve to stand beside Egypt's wonders in the human story of civilization. The world at last began to listen, and now new tools are amplifying those voices. With satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and 3D modeling, modern researchers are peeling back the desert's mysteries layer by layer. Beneath the dunes, they've found hidden chambers, forgotten temples, and entire cities still sleeping in the sand. The discoveries hint that what we know of Kush is only the beginning, that the kingdom's true scale and sophistication remain buried, waiting for their second dawn. These scholars, past and present, are more than historians. They are resurrectionists. Against centuries of neglect, they have coaxed a lost civilization back into the world's memory. And in doing so, they've proven a deeper truth, that history's silences are not permanent, and that when courage meets curiosity, even empires buried in sand can rise again. Beneath the surface beauty of the Kushite pyramids lies a story not just of art and faith, but of engineering brilliance. What at first glance seems simple becomes, on closer inspection, an intricate symphony of design, geometry, and innovation. For centuries, outsiders assumed these monuments were crude echoes of Egyptian architecture. But the deeper archaeologists dig, the clearer it becomes. The builders of Kush were not imitators. They were masters in their own right. Unlike Egypt's colossal pyramids, each demanding decades of labor and vast armies of workers, the Kushite pyramids were feats of efficiency and precision. Constructed rapidly, yet enduringly, they used smaller, finely cut stone blocks, each one measured and placed with meticulous accuracy. The effect is astonishing. Walls rising at angles of 70 degrees or more, held together not by brute mass, but by mathematical balance. These steep, elegant silhouettes are triumphs of both design and daring, monuments that defy gravity while embodying grace. Inside, their ingenuity only deepens. The builders developed corbelled vaulted chambers, a technique centuries ahead of its time. By carefully overlapping stones inward as they ascended, they distributed the pyramid's immense weight evenly, creating strong, self-supporting ceilings without the need for central columns. This structural intelligence, allowed the Kushites to achieve steeper inclines and more intricate internal layouts, spaces that feel intimate yet eternal. Recent excavations have revealed another surprise: multiple burial chambers within a single pyramid. Far from being mere tombs for individual rulers, some structures seem to have housed entire royal lineages, each chamber stacked or aligned in perfect symmetry. The implication is profound. Death, for the Kushites, was not solitary. It was dynastic. Their pyramids were not static memorials, but living architectures of ancestry, connecting generations through stone. The builders also looked to the heavens. Astronomers and engineers worked in tandem, aligning pyramids precisely with the cardinal directions, and perhaps with specific stars or constellations sacred to Kushite cosmology. Some alignments suggest connections to Sirius and Orion, celestial bodies tied to cycles of rebirth and divine order. These were not arbitrary choices. Each structure became a map of the universe, anchoring the royal soul to both earth and sky, ensuring harmony between the living world and the divine. Chemical analyses of the materials have revealed further marvels. The mortar and stone composition show a sophisticated understanding of materials science. Binding agents, crafted from local minerals and plant-based compounds, have proven astonishingly durable, holding fast for over 2,000 years through relentless desert heat, shifting sands, and temperature extremes. Modern engineers still study their resilience, marveling at how such ancient techniques achieved what contemporary methods often cannot. Timeless endurance, and perhaps the most telling achievement of all, is continuity. Long after Egypt had turned away from pyramid building, Kush continued refining and reinventing it for over a millennium. This persistence was not nostalgia. It was innovation, sustained by purpose. The pyramid, for the Kushites, remained a sacred form, a vessel of faith and identity. Each generation reinterpreted it, combining tradition with technical evolution. Every block, every angle, every buried chamber, whispers of a people who understood the language of permanence. They did not seek to dominate nature, but to harmonize with it, to build in rhythm with the sun, the stars, and the sands that would one day conceal them. Today, as archaeologists peer through layers of time using radar and satellite eyes, what they uncover is not just engineering excellence, but the mindset of a civilization that saw no boundary between science and spirit. Beneath the sand, the genius of Kush still stands, unyielding, unacknowledged for too long, yet perfectly balanced between heaven and earth. A quiet revolution is unfolding across Sudan, not in the corridors of power, but in the minds and hearts of a new generation. Young Sudanese are reclaiming their past with a vigor that is both defiant and celebratory. For decades, the pyramids of Meroe, Napata, and El Kuru were shadows of Egypt's monuments in the global imagination. Today, they are symbols of pride, identity, and a long-overdue recognition of Africa's deep history. Social media has become their megaphone. Historians, artists, and activists flood platforms with images of sandstone peaks piercing the sky, with illustrations of Kushite kings and queens, and with stories that demand the world pay attention. Every post is a challenge to the Egyptian-centric narratives that dominated textbooks for generations. A declaration that Sudan-Apus history is not peripheral, but foundational. These digital campaigns have turned quiet ruins into global conversation points, bridging deserts and continents with nothing more than an image and a story. The momentum built during Sudan's 2019 revolution only strengthened this cultural reclamation. As dictatorial rule fell, protesters carried banners painted with Kushite symbols, while murals evoked the proud faces of Nubian pharaohs. Ancient motifs were reimagined as emblems of resistance, continuity, and national pride. In streets and squares, the past became present. The story of an empire long silenced merged seamlessly with the fight for freedom and dignity in the modern era. Archaeology itself is responding to this renewed energy. New expeditions, often collaborative efforts between Sudanese experts and international teams, are prioritizing local leadership. Excavations are no longer about outsiders claiming knowledge. They are platforms for Sudanese voices to guide research, interpretation, and preservation. Sites previously neglected now receive careful study, revealing hidden chambers, artifacts, and inscriptions that deepen understanding of Kushite society. Plans are underway to make these sites accessible to visitors while preserving their integrity. Tourism infrastructure, roads, signage, guided pathways, is being designed to respect the desert, the monuments, and the fragile sands that have guarded these pyramids for millennia. At the same time, museums in Khartoum are being renovated to properly house thousands of artifacts, many of which have never been adequately displayed. Exhibits are reimagined to tell Sudan's story in its own voice, highlighting achievements in art, engineering, and governance that have too long been overshadowed. But this renaissance is about far more than tourism or research. It is about identity, about a nation reclaiming its own narrative and insisting that history recognize the depth and sophistication of African civilizations. It is a corrective to centuries of neglect, bias, and erasure. It is about ensuring that future generations grow up knowing that greatness was not limited to Egypt, Greece, or Rome, but thrived along the Nile's southern reaches as well. For Sudanese youth, each rediscovered pyramid, each artifact restored, each story shared online is a bridge between the past and the future. They are reconnecting with an empire that endured for over 1,000 years, whose kings once ruled the Nile from Nubia to the Delta, and whose legacy continues to shape the pride and imagination of a modern nation. Here, in the intersection of sand and social media, of heritage and revolution, Sudan is rewriting history, not just for itself, but for the world. History is never neutral. The story of Sudan's pyramids reminds us that what we know or think we know about the past is shaped as much by power as by evidence. The Kingdom of Kush, with its towering pyramids and thriving cities, was once one of the greatest civilizations on Earth. Yet for centuries, it barely registered in global consciousness. Why? Because the lenses through which historians, archaeologists, and educators viewed the world were narrow, biased, and often colonial. Power does not only reside in armies or crowns, it resides in libraries, in funding, in the authority to define what counts as important. For generations, European and Western narratives of human civilization elevated certain regions, Greece, Rome, Egypt, while diminishing or ignoring others. Achievements that did not align with preconceived notions of sophistication, intellect, or artistry were marginalized or erased. The Kushite pyramids expose this bias. Their very existence contradicts assumptions about African civilizations, yet for too long they were dismissed as mere echoes of Egyptian glory. In confronting this, we are forced to ask uncomfortable questions. How many other civilizations have been silenced because their stories did not suit prevailing hierarchies. How many cities, monuments, and ideas remain overlooked, not hidden beneath earth and sand, but buried beneath the collective assumptions of scholars, educators, and institutions. The past, it seems, is not always missing. It is sometimes ignored. Yet there is hope in the desert sands. The pyramids of Sudan endure, unyielding against wind, time, and neglect. They are more than royal tombs. They are testaments to human ingenuity, resilience, and vision. The builders of Meroe innovated in architecture, astronomy, and statecraft. They governed, traded, and thrived for centuries, leaving monuments that speak across millennia. And though their history was obscured, the truth has survived, waiting for those willing to see, to question, and to amplify it. The lesson extends far beyond Sudan. It is a reminder that history is not static, and that our understanding of human achievement is incomplete if we allow blind spots to define it. Excellence, creativity, and innovation have arisen in every corner of the globe, from deserts to rainforests, from river valleys to mountain tops. Every civilization has the capacity to contribute to the collective story of humanity, yet only some have been deemed worthy of remembrance. Until now, the Kushite pyramids stand as monuments not only to kings and queens, but to the resilience of truth itself. They teach that greatness is universal, and that narratives can and must be corrected. As we rediscover Sudan's past, we are reminded to look beyond conventional wisdom, to listen to the silent corners of history, and to honor the brilliance that survives, no matter how long it was ignored. In their stones, the past speaks, and it demands that we widen our gaze, recognize the full spectrum of human achievement, and remember that the story of civilization is far richer than we have been told. Here we stand, at the edge of time, between sand and story, looking out over a horizon shaped by centuries, yet often ignored. The journey through Sudanese pyramids is not merely a tour of ruins. It is an encounter with a civilization that refuses to be forgotten. These monuments are more than stone. They are a challenge to the narratives we have inherited, an invitation to rethink what we know about the ancient world and whose histories have been deemed worthy of remembrance. Sudan's pyramids ask us to see differently. They demand that we recognize the Black Pharaohs who once ruled both Kush and Egypt, that we trace the sharp, defiant angles of pyramids that rise steeper than Giza's, and that we acknowledge a civilization that thrived for centuries after Egypt's golden age had faded. In their shadows, the past is not a static relic, but a living dialogue between what was recorded and what was erased, between silence and discovery, between power and truth. To witness these pyramids is to participate in that dialogue. Whether through photographs, research, or, for those fortunate enough, in person, engagement is an act of reclamation. Each shared story, each newly unearthed artifact, each lesson taught to the next generation pushes back against centuries of neglect. The pyramids are not merely historical curiosities. They are invitations to care, to remember, and to honor the resilience of a people whose brilliance endured even when the world refused to acknowledge it. And the implications extend far beyond Sudan. They remind us that history is never complete, that greatness is not confined to the regions or cultures that textbooks have long celebrated. Kush teaches that human achievement is universal, that creativity, innovation, and power can emerge anywhere, and that the stories we inherit are often incomplete, shaped as much by prejudice as by truth. To learn about Kush is to expand our understanding of civilization itself. to see the map of human history in richer, more inclusive colors. So the next time pyramids are mentioned, remember more than Giza. Remember the Black Kings and Queens, the sharper peaks rising from Sudanese sands, the civilization that defied erasure and endured for a millennium. History is not a fixed tale. It is an ongoing conversation, rewritten as new evidence emerges and old biases crumble like stone under wind and time. If this story has moved you, if it has shifted the way you see the ancient world, then subscribe to this channel. Join us as we uncover more forgotten histories, bring untold stories into the light, and explore the full scope of human ingenuity. The past is far stranger, more diverse, and more magnificent than you ever imagined, and we are only just beginning to reveal its secrets.